All right. Hello and welcome to my senior. Let me get this out of the way. Hello and welcome to my senior thesis TED Talk. My name is Ben Glenn, as most of you know, and today I'll be discussing my senior thesis question, which was how can renewable energy technologies be integrated into cities and rural areas across the United States in a cost-effective and wise mechanical manner. Today I'll be focusing mainly on the mechanics behind renewable energies and implementing them, not so much the cost effectiveness. So I want to start off with a way to get everyone's mind wrapped around electricity, production, and consumption of the world, and then I'll narrow it down. So in this box I have 10 100-watt incandescent light bulbs. It's a simple light bulb, hopefully you've seen one in your lifetime. That box has 10 times 100, that is 10,000 watts of electricity to fully light up that box. Now let's scale that up 2 or 3 times. Let's go 3. So now I have 3 boxes. That is 30 light bulbs. That is 30,000 watts to fully light up that box of light bulbs. You could probably light up about this room. Now let's scale it up one more time. Let's get a little bit bigger. Let's go, pick a number, 15 billion boxes, roughly. Now that is about 150 billion light bulbs, and you need a monumental amount of power and electricity to light all of these light bulbs. But how much exactly? Well, if you spend one day on Earth collecting all the electricity we produce on average, you will come away with about 15 terawatts of electricity. That's enough to power all of those light bulbs to their full brightness. So, what does this have to do with my project? Well, that is the worldwide scale. We have 15 terawatts of power produced every day. So let's go move into my question. How much of it is produced by the United States? Well, luckily I know the percentage because it says percentage. It is roughly 18% of the world's power is produced by the United States itself. Now let's move even deeper. Let's go to renewable energies. That is roughly 13% of the United States power, which is growing faster than any other power in the world. And the rest is composed of coal, natural gas, oil, a little bit of nuclear. 3 of these powers produce large amounts of CO2, some more than others, and that CO2 is releasing into our atmosphere. That is a bad thing. You ask why, and that percentage of 13% needs to grow to a larger percentage. Well, why is it bad? We're all going to die. And I mean this in eventually, of course, but it could be sooner rather than later. Carbon dioxide has disastrous effects on the Earth's atmosphere. As you can see, these 2 graphs of just average global temperature and sea level correspond to the carbon dioxide level rising at the same time. What can global average temperature do? Well, it can create more droughts. It can create more extreme weather patterns. Sea level rise can destroy homes, displace cities, displace people. It can hurt the environment, and it currently is, and we have to change this. So in my paper and in my research, I found a 3-step process solving this issue and implementing more renewable energies just into the United States itself. The first step is a smart grid for the United States. The next step would be implementing renewable energies in their environmental aspects, I guess, or implementing them in a smarter manner than we currently are. And along with these 2 things, we can overall lower power consumption just in the United States ourselves. So let's go back to this grid, this idea of upgrading the current energy grid. Well, our current energy grid is very weak. It is able to be crippled in a moment's notice by hackers, as we've all heard at one point or another. We have a small amount of blackouts that happen, but it can't support what we want to do with renewable energies. So we're going to replace it with this smart energy grid that is composed of a distributed energy grid and smart meters / transformers / sensors / lots of other things that go into this distributed energy grid. So in the distributed energy grid, that's that top diagram, that is comprised of houses with renewable energies on all of them that are connected by sensory controls to either battery banks or just each house itself. That can all go back to a substation and back out to other cities and counties in the United States. It can also work vice versa, so we can slowly take our reliance off of old fossil fuels and continue to use those until we have fully implemented renewable technologies and replaced them. So with these, I guess, homes that are connected, you do need things called smart meters and smart transformers. So a meter is something that measures your electricity usage, I guess, every time that you turn on a light. It's outside on most power lines. That one is actually in the bottom of my work. All of those are smart meters. So a conventional meter can only take in power. It can only give it, and you can only consume it from one direction. These smart meters are bi-directional. You can consume and produce electricity and put it back onto the grid. It's the same thing with the smart transformer, same general idea. So with these, you can implement more renewable energies. And with smart meters and the houses that are all connected, for example, let's say you're not at home and you can connect to your neighbor's power, and instead of buying it from a coal power plant that is thousands of miles away, or just hundreds, you can take their solar PV panels that is producing electricity and consume that instead of other electricity. So now we can implement the renewable energies. We have this smart grid that is ingenious. It's able to withstand the renewable energies now. So I focused on mainly these 4 renewable energies. I started with PV panels, which are in the top corner, photovoltaic, wind, biomass, and hydroelectric. Biomass is the little vial, if you didn't get it, 'cause the generators aren't very pretty. So let's start with solar PV. We have to implement these in very effective ways. For a solar panel to work, it needs constant direct sunlight. That means whenever the sun hits it, let's do in short, it excites electrons, that produces electricity. These need to be implemented in a more effective way. One way of doing that is with LiDAR data or satellite imaging. You can project where the sun will hit every day of the year and see where the most effective places and the most effective angle is to implement solar so it can never stop collecting the sun, except for at night. Wind works pretty much the same way as PV does, but it doesn't collect the sun, it collects the wind with blades and a series of gears that turns a generator. To make this electricity work, you need a constant supply of wind. Where do you get wind? Well, lots of coastlines. The ocean is flat still, hopefully it will stay flat, and it pushes the wind currents that hit the banks of, let's say, California. The wind will never stop blowing on the coast of California, or it won't stop blowing at a regular rate. Another place that the wind continues to blow is with valleys. Valleys tend to collect wind and push it out one of the ends, so you can implement these wind turbines at the ends of valleys themselves. You can also use the same satellite imaging, just as Saudi Arabia did with the whole mapping program, and they mapped their whole country, and that mapped the whole country, and each wind turbine that they currently had was producing a certain amount of electricity, and they found the most effective areas and implemented more wind turbines in those areas rather than other areas. Biomass is, unlike the other two, it can operate full time. It's just like a gas-powered generator, but it uses biomass, which is earth. It is trees, plants, shrubs, branches, leaves, everything that can burn instead of like rocks and dirt. You don't burn those, obviously. So this can be obviously creating power full time. It burns at a very high temperature, producing very little CO2. But the one downside of this is we have to be very aware of how much we're consuming. We can't cut down whole forests to keep our lights on. We have to make sure that there's an excess of biomass in the areas that we implement these everywhere except pretty much deserts, because deserts don't have much to burn. Another way, or another renewable technology, is hydroelectric. Most of us have seen a dam in our lives, and hydroelectric, well, the United States currently has 50,000 dams with the potential of producing more than 2 gigawatt hours of electricity each. Now, if we implement, or these dams were created before the idea of capturing water flow to produce energy. So now, if we go back and we implement these turbines that turns a generator, we can capture all this energy and make just a huge portion of the United States energy by just hydroelectric power. So now we have all of our renewable technologies and our grid. We're done, right? Well, no. We need to lower overall consumption. Now this is somewhat simple, somewhat not. It involves all of us, all of the public, everyone in the United States. One way that we can start to do this is replace these old light bulbs that are horrible with LEDs. All of these light bulbs can produce the same amount of light with using roughly 6 times less the amount that a 100-watt incandescent bulb can. They also last 10 times or 10 more years than an incandescent bulb will. It has a longer lifespan. That in itself will produce or will consume less energy rather than every light bulb is a 100-watt incandescent light bulb. Another way to lower energy consumption or shift energy consumption is with this idea of peak off-peak hourly pricing. You may have heard this from your parents, or you may have seen it yourself. LPEA does it here in Durango, where they price electricity based on how many people use it. So let's say everyone gets home at 6 o'clock at night. They need to cook dinner, wash their clothes. Everyone gets home, turns on their TVs, plugs in their smartphones. Well, every time that happens, they have to turn up coal power plants and start generating more electricity. So it becomes more expensive. It's less expensive at, let's say, 11 o'clock, when no one's home, no one's actually consuming electricity at their households. The price will be lower at 11 o'clock. So you make more conscious decisions to turn on your washing machine, let's say a 5-hour delay until you are no longer home and the electricity is cheaper. It can then use renewable technologies that have been integrated, like solar when the sun is out, and it can use other energies like that, so that it's not turning on any coal power plants and taking more consumption on, or putting more stress on the grid itself at one period of time, I guess. Another way to lower overall consumption is just lower your consumption. Everyone likes lower bills, of course, and that's just a huge part of what we do. Another part that is even simpler, or not simpler, but when you build a house, you think of, this isn't really related to electricity, but when you build a house, you can use passive solar architecture. Now that passive solar architecture, well, in the sun, you have a roof that is angled in a certain direction so that the summer sun won't get in and your house will stay cooler. In turn, when the winter sun is out, it can go through the windows, heating your house in one direction or another. That makes better heating and cooling decisions within your house itself. Overall, let's go back through our 3 steps. We have our smart energy grid that is comprised of distributed energy, which is a household item that we can connect to each other just through our grid and smart meters and smart transformers. So that, for example, we can buy electricity off of our neighbor if they aren't home, so that energy is not being wasted. Then we can implement our renewable energies. Solar has to be with with satellite imaging to see where the most effective places are. Same with wind, you can do that just along solar. Biomass, we just have to make sure that we have conscious decision making of how much we consume every day and how much we are actually cutting down on our forests or our natural parks or wildlife area. While these 2 things are going on, we will just overall lower consumption. We will switch to LEDs. We will change to peak off-peak hourly pricing to shift our peak so it's not a peak, it's more of just a flat line of everyone's consuming power at a relatively safe rate, so we don't have to turn on large generation systems. All these things will happen in turn, and if they don't, well, this isn't a very proven method. I found it in many research articles, and I've also created a little bit of it. So if we don't do this, well, what will happen? Well, as I showed you in the beginning, we're gonna die. We need to lower overall CO2 consumption from fossil fuel plants like coal, natural gas, and oil, and that can be phased out in these certain ways. Thank you very much for being at my TED Talk.
we're going to open it up to questions from our panel and from our audience as well. So if you have a question for Ben about his research, please feel free to raise your hand. He will call on you.
Kieran.
Okay, you may not have thought about this, but how do all of these things factor into land usage?
So currently, I guess it factors into land usage as we have a lot of wind turbines that are already producing energy, and same with PV panels. PV panels can just go on roofs, tops of skyscrapers. A lot of the satellite imaging that I looked on was just tops of skyscrapers. The land's already taken up. It's not like these massive production fields like out in the middle of the desert where you just have like fields of solar panels. It's more of like the distributed energy grid where it's just everyone has these certain things. They can be either privately funded or governmentally funded, and everyone will have them on their own property. So the land is already being taken up. Same with like biomass, it's just a large generation system that is connected to the grid, so it just replaces where a coal power plant maybe was. Kyle.
So if I understand right, the idea of the smart meters is a way of measuring both the requirements and the production going both directions.
Yeah.
And then essentially kind of understanding where the energy is throughout the entire grid to be able to allocate it appropriately.
Yes.
Do we have the technology to do that now?
Well, currently, as you saw like in the bottom of my work, we have these smart meters. LPA is currently like working on implementing more of these smart meters. One act that was proposed was by Obama, or the Obama administration, and that is funding local co-ops to be able to have, the technology to, I guess, consistently watch the meters and see everyone's overall consumption per second or per minute. One example of that is like Ontario, Canada already has this system. I actually found a website that you can go to and you can see different sections and different regions in Ontario, Canada, how much they're consuming building by building, so they can, I guess, produce the electricity that they need in certain sections and just predict where it will be.
So we have the technology exists to do this.
Yes.
We aren't fully there. Is that a matter of we haven't committed to doing this politically or financially?
I think those two tie into each other. I think politically we're in a stalemate with this new administration. The old administration had started to take steps in this direction, but the new one has kind of frozen those, and we're kind of in like a limbo of we don't know what could possibly happen. And the costs, it does cost a lot to implement all these new things, and like either to do government-funded satellite or solar panels and wind turbines. So it's just like, it's a mix of the two, I would say, that we're in political limbo. Like, we have the funding, we just have to reroute it, but policymakers are deciding whether it's worth it or not. Fair?
So one thing that, I don't know, I feel like needs to be considered when changing the energy industry is the money is already like in, I don't know, the big coal and oil and natural gas, it's in their pockets, and so we need to get them on board this plan, right? And how do you see ways of doing that?
So what I've seen is that coal is starting to be phased out in almost every place in the world except China. It's an old technology that we know how to do well, and it's cheap, but they're finding that it does have detrimental effects, and people don't like the sound of a coal power plant. They like the idea of, let's put a panel on my roof because I'm environmentally friendly. So I think those things will kind of phase themselves out, and they'll just start investing in renewable energy companies. But I have only read a few articles on that idea, so I'm not like completely sure how I would do it myself. Either one.
You've brought up biomass reactors a few times in your presentation, and I was just wondering about the efficiency of those. So you say that you could replace a coal plant with a biomass reactor, but would it be maybe that you'd have to replace a coal plant with 2 or 3 biomass reactors?
So from what I've seen is the studies that I read were in small towns in Germany where they would replace all electricity generation and they would use solar PV assisted by biomass generators, so that would kick in whenever the sun wasn't shining. and those were very small cities, and they did have like 2 or 3 of those generators themselves. So biomass isn't currently like a huge generation system. You will have to have 2 or 3, but I think in future generations, if we do have excess biomass, we could create more efficient ones that produce larger amounts of electricity.
And to go off that as well, what about the abundance of biomass? Is it just as abundant as coal, or would we ever run out of it and not be able to power our generators?
Well, the Earth is always going to be growing things, hopefully. That would be like the best goal. And we always kind of have excess biomass here and there, as well as people like the ideas of fire mitigation. So that's like when you go up into a forest, cut down a bunch of trees, and you kind of cut down all of like the oak shrubs, and that usually just gets turned into wood chips or just into a burner that burns it at high heat. So we're already burning a lot of it, but we do have the biomass, and if we do start to run out of it, hopefully we can find another way to replace biomass itself. But currently it's just like within small communities it's very effective, but on a larger scale I think it would be harder to implement. Steve?
Two questions. One, what is our target? Like you said that we need to reduce our consumption, but like by how much? What are we trying to accomplish?
That is one thing that I forgot to mention. So renewable energies have a downside, which is called capacity factor. Capacity factor is how much we can rely on that energy full time, and wind and solar energy is roughly like 20%, and we need to, if we can get those percentages higher, we have to lower consumption by a significant amount, and then those percentages can move up as we can store power in smarter places. So overall consumption just has to come down by a large factor. I'm not sure what that factor could be.
Okay. And you alluded to the second part of my question, which is what is the role of energy storage in making this plan come to fruition?
So I was looking into the ideas of energy storage, and we currently have the technologies to store energy, but not for very like long-term periods. We have batteries and we have other ways of storing it, but they aren't like completely efficient. We lose energy over time, and that's why I was thinking of replacing, I guess, energy storage with biomass, so we can continually produce the energy that we need to use. But if we have to ever get off of biomass, we do have to implement energy storage. And another example of energy storage would be like water. Like one of the things that you showed me is storing it in large reservoirs, pumping it up, and then releasing it when you do need the energy to turn turbines again. So I think that energy storage is very important, but we currently don't have like the technology to, I guess, mass produce it or spread it widely.
Time for one more question.
Kurt?
The biomass that you looked at, was that digestion or incineration?
I was looking at incineration.
All right. All right, thank you,
That's
Ben.
an easy last question.